Joining us in the studio is Gregg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum. Shalom.
Hi.
On the day of the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, you came out with a campaign really hours after the beginning of the ceasefire, demanding or basically saying there was no victory.
Right, and for the last 4 years, we've had a project at the Middle East Forum called the Israel Victory Project, the self-defining objective. For the first 3 years and 11 months of it, it was very vague, intentionally, because it's up to the leaders of Israel to decide what is a victory against Palestinian rejectionism. In wars, writ large across the globe, it's not that a side wins when it recognizes that it's attained victory, it wins when the other side recognizes that it has suffered a defeat or a loss. So the idea here is to bring an end to Palestinian rejectionism of Israel, of a Jewish state, and our right to live here.
You know, one would say, listen, in terms of the army, it was a victory. And as you say now that you'd like the other side to say, we lost, you're never going to see that from the Hamas for PR reasons.
Well, I don't think we necessarily get to that point. I think that the internal recognition of saying that they lost will reflect in the way in which they dialogue with the international community and also with Israel. You have a meeting which is taking place in Cairo today, where you have Hamas on the first floor of Egyptian intelligence. The Israelis are sitting on the second floor, and there's literally a runner going up and down between the stairs trying to negotiate a fourth long-term ceasefire, or hudna or tahida in Arabic, in terms of them being able to negotiate some kind of accommodation so Hamas can rearm, and so Israel can think of its strategic position vis-a-vis the Palestinians to prevent or deter a fifth round. But they do that every single time. And just like Einstein says, the definition of insanity is to try to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. In this case, the Israeli public, I think, according to polls that have come out and according to just general commentary from all those affected sectors from this last round of 11 days of fighting, demand that the government come to a final strategic calculus.
You're saying affected sectors because we heard from the people while they were under fire in the south saying, don't go ahead with a ceasefire yet. Complete your mission.
These are the people suffering the most. So you have people with rockets raining down their heads, 4,000 in a span of 11 days, considering the fact that only 4,500 fell in 56 days of Operation Protective Edge, which was 7 years ago. So the Hamas has increased their ability to launch salvos.
Both sides have increased their abilities.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that Israel didn't have the ability to stop the rocket threat back in 2014.
But the way it acted this time is just a bombarding without stopping, and everything was a higher velocity. No?
I don't necessarily agree with that position.
Okay.
I think that the integration of international law advisors, every battalion in the Army, every wing in the Air Force, has to abide by an international law predicate before they can attack a target. And that, in my mind, people are complaining about the AP and the Al Jazeera offices and Hamas's intelligence headquarters in the middle of Gaza City being fell. That's not the big deal. The big deal is how many other towers weren't struck down because there was some kind of other balance between civilian and military concerns.
But hey, you're out there telling the world this is the most moral army in the world. And the reason that you could say that is because of that.
Well, morality doesn't win wars, okay? What wins wars is the ferocity and the lethality of an actual objective to defeat your enemy. And until that is absorbed. And by the way, Aviv Kochavi, the chief of staff, in his first speech, when he was inducted as the new chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, I think 2 or 3 years ago, he said, victory is the only value of the IDF. This is the first chief of staff since going back maybe 40 years ago to Elazar, who was saying, you know what? We have to be able to prevent the enemy from doing anything against us, and it's not through deterrence, it's through degrading their ability to fight. He had the chance to say it, but unfortunately, I think he was constricted by international and domestic concerns with the Security Cabinet.
What would have happened in this conflict that you would have come to our studio and said, Yoni, it's victory?
It's not my job to say victory. Like we said before, and it's Hamas's idea to recognize defeat. But I would say this. If the Hamas came to some sort of, let's say, let's not sit there begging on the outskirts of the Erez crossing, which is the entrance to the to the Gaza Strip. But if they said that we would be willing to disarm our rocket capabilities in exchange for humanitarian aid, that might have been a semblance of victory. If they went so far as to say the leaders of Hamas are going to evacuate the Gaza Strip because they fear for their lives and their livelihood, just like happened with the PLO after 1982 with the Lebanese war, that might be a victory. More than anything else, the return of Israel's captives and the bodies of those 2 soldiers who have been sitting there for 7 years with no preconditions from the side of the Hamas, that might have been part of a victory.
So let's end with the campaign objectives. Sure. You're out there with the campaign, and you're not telling the army, go back in right now. So what's the objective?
We're preparing now for a national conversation with all affected sectors of Israeli society, whether it be residents of the South, those who have been shell-shocked by the fighting, children, reservists, or anyone who comes from the political sectors who has to make these decisions at the end of the day, so that when the government, God forbid, comes with a 5th round of fighting, we'll know that it has the support of every sector of Israel that are in one way or another is either directly affected by this rocket fire or not. It's not about blaming anyone. It's about getting ready for the final round rather than a next round.
Gregg Roman, Director of the Middle East Forum, thank you very much.
Thank you.